Look closer. For decades, you have been lied to about the 19th century. They spoon-fed you a narrative of slow progress, industrial toil, and triumphant Victorian ingenuity. But I am the Decoder, and what we are about to reveal proves that the 19th century was the biggest fabrication in human history. It was not a time of creation, but a desperate, frantic scramble to cover up a planetary collapse. Look at the foundations of every major city on Earth: New York, Paris, St. Petersburg, Sydney. You see massive, intricate, neoclassical buildings. Yet, their entire lower levels, their supposed ground floors, are buried in uniform earth. Windows are bricked up, arches sit half-submerged below street level. The official answer is a pathetic excuse: rising street levels. This is the first, crucial lie. No localized phenomenon can explain a global architectural anomaly. We are looking at the scars of a single, worldwide event. This event, which we call the Mud Flood, did not just bury buildings, it reset human civilization, wiping out a highly advanced global empire, Tartaria. The survivors, the cabal who wrote your history books, inherited ruins too grand to claim as their own work. They had to choose: reveal the terrifying truth of the collapse or execute a global cover-up. They chose silence. Stay with us. Because by the time this video ends, your entire understanding of the land beneath your feet will be shattered, and you will learn the secret technology they used to physically move the earth to bury this civilization. This is the Epoch Reset. The evidence is not hidden, it's hidden in plain sight. It's in the 19th century photographs that look more like scenes of excavation than construction. Historians claim that men with primitive tools erected these colossal stone monuments in mere months. But our forensic analysis of the archives proves the horrifying reality: they weren't building them. They were digging them out. Imagine the sheer scale of the deception. To maintain the lie, they didn't just need to rewrite the timeline, they needed to surgically remove evidence of a technologically superior past. They needed to make you believe that men struggling with steam shovels and draft horses somehow managed to lift and place precision-cut granite blocks weighing 20 tons. It defies physics. It defies logic. It only makes sense if the buildings were already there, waiting to be claimed. The crucial detail is the uniformity of the burial layer. It is not debris from fires. It is not localized silt from a river. It is a dense, homogeneous layer of fine earth found in basements and excavation sites across continents. This suggests a planetary, hydraulic event, a deluge unlike any recorded in official history, a literal flood of mud that entombed the lower reaches of the Tartarian world. The depth of this catastrophe often required the 19th century scavengers to simply abandon the lowest floors, sealing them with brick. The magnificent entryways designed for a bygone era became damp, low-ceilinged cellars. This physical evidence, replicated globally, is the most solid proof of the 19th century's greatest fraud. The architectural lie is only the beginning. If the buildings were too massive for 19th century humans to build, then who were the true architects? The answer is staggering. The scale of the architecture points to a biological anomaly. We are talking about giants. And the historical record they tried to burn still contains undeniable proof of their existence. Let's zoom in on the sheer logistical impossibility of the 19th century. Forget the conspiracy for a moment and focus purely on engineering. The time frames and resources claimed by official history are a cruel joke on the intelligence of the modern viewer. Take the World Fairs, the so-called White Cities. We are told the 1893 Chicago World's Columbian Exposition was erected in just over 2 years. A massive, complex, classically perfect city of palaces, domes, and waterways, covering hundreds of acres. This would require an unparalleled amount of advanced infrastructure, synchronized labor, and colossal transportation capabilities that simply did not exist. The logistical and mechanical limits of the 1890s made this timeline impossible. The official story claims these structures were temporary, made of cheap plaster, staff. But does plaster require multi-ton stone foundations? Do temporary buildings demand the precision of ancient Roman engineering? The lie of plaster and lath was the first line of defense. The true function of the World Fairs was not to showcase new technology, but to reclaim and temporarily exhibit the most pristine Tartarian ruins that were salvageable after the mud flood. They cleaned them up, patched the damage, called them temporary pavilions, and then, crucially, demolished them just as quickly. Why the rapid destruction? Because the structures were a threat. Their scale, their elegance, and the remnants of their advanced, free energy technology were too advanced for the emerging narrative of primitive Victorian progress. They had to be eliminated before the public started asking the logical questions: who built this? And why is it gone so fast? The precision stonework itself screams of suppressed technology. Look at the seamless joints in the granite used in buildings across Washington, D.C. or Moscow. To achieve this level of accuracy without modern machining tools and transport vehicles on a mass scale is simply impossible. You are forced to accept one of two scenarios: either the 19th century possessed a secret, superior, anti-gravity technology that was never disclosed, or they inherited these structures fully intact from a civilization that did. Logic demands the second conclusion. The uniform style of the buildings, the neoclassical, almost Romanesque grandeur, suggests a unified global architectural code. This is not the architecture of disparate nations struggling to industrialize. This is the inherited infrastructure of an organized, single, global entity. The global empire that they desperately tried to erase from the maps and history books. The technology of Tartaria was not just superior, it was powered by an entirely different source. The large, ornate domes and spires that crowned every major 19th century building weren't for decoration. They were functional. They were devices built to harvest the planet's ambient energy. We are about to dive into the suppressed science that literally proves limitless energy was real in the 19th century and was deliberately stolen from you. Follow the energy. The greatest motivation for the 19th century cover-up was the seizure and monopolization of power. Tartaria's technology was not based on combustion, coal, or oil. It was based on ambient energy, clean, wireless, and universally accessible power harvested directly from the Earth's natural electromagnetic field. Look at the rooftops of the buildings built before 1900. They are covered in intricate metalwork, massive copper domes, spires, ornate finials, and large, complex antennas. These are dismissed as mere lightning rods or ornamental flourishes. But they were not. They were receivers. They were the necessary component of a global, wireless power grid inherited from Tartaria. Think about the World Fairs again. The dazzling, almost unnatural level of illumination seen in those grainy photographs was not powered by fragile, localized steam generators. It was a massive, temporary demonstration of a captured energy system, a system that could power entire cities instantly and wirelessly. The suppression of this technology is directly linked to the rise of figures like J.P. Morgan and the systematic dismantling of Nikola Tesla's work. Tesla's vision of wireless, free energy was not a radical invention, it was an attempt to reintroduce Tartarian technology to a world that had forgotten it. His laboratory, his towers, his experiments, all were destroyed because they threatened the emerging cabal's plan to monetize and control energy through carbon and fossil fuels. The decision was clear: an entire planetary civilization, built on the principle of free, decentralized power, had to be replaced by a civilization built on metered, controllable scarcity. The mud flood provided the perfect opportunity to destroy the physical infrastructure of the old grid and impose the new economic model. They couldn't destroy all the energy receivers immediately, so they offered the official lie: they are just decorative spires. But if you look at the geometry, the conductive materials, and the placement on the highest points of these massive structures, the true purpose is revealed. They were the antennas of a forgotten age. This explains why so much effort was put into burning and rewriting 19th century scientific texts. Any mention of ambient energy, the ether, or the true purpose of these architectural features had to be surgically removed to ensure the new, profitable paradigm of scarcity took root. The Great Fire of 19th century libraries was not an accident. It was an act of technological censorship. The controllers needed a plausible excuse for the scale of the ancient technology. They couldn't admit to a prior, superior civilization. Instead, they fabricated the story of humanity's slow, upward climb from primitive origins. To sell this lie, they had to eliminate the most compelling biological proof of Tartaria: the giants. The 19th century was filled with countless discoveries of massive human skeletons. But where are they now? If the doorways are 12 feet high, and the ceilings are 30 feet tall, the occupants must have matched the scale. This is the simple, chilling logic that historians desperately try to ignore. The truth is that the 19th century was not just about suppressing technology, it was about erasing a race of people that we have to look past the officially sanitized history and into the dusty local newspaper archives from the 1800s. They are filled with documented, corroborated, and often highly excited accounts of farmers, miners, and construction workers unearthing massive human skeletal remains. Skeletons measuring 8, 9, 10, and even 12 feet tall. These accounts were common enough to constitute a historical pattern, but where are the bones? What happened to the massive femur bones and colossal skulls detailed in papers from Ohio, California, and Russia? They were systematically collected, catalogued by emerging scientific institutions, and then vanished. The key culprit in this historical disappearance is often cited as the Smithsonian Institution and other major 19th century academic bodies. The emerging scientific consensus of the late 19th century was rigid. Human evolution was linear, slow, and followed a strict Darwinian model. A race of highly advanced giants who built global empires just a few centuries prior would instantly destabilize this narrative. They would prove that human history is cyclical, marked by collapses and resets, not slow progress. This was a truth the new ruling elite could not allow. The giants, the builders of Tartaria, were the ultimate inconvenient truth. The mud flood provided the physical chaos needed to bury their cities, and the subsequent historical purge provided the ideological cover to bury their bones. The remaining population, traumatized and small, were forced to feel dwarfed by the magnificent ruins they now inhabited, reinforcing the idea of a grand, mysterious past rather than a superior, recent one. The physical evidence of the giants' existence is the ultimate proof that the 19th century was a resettlement project. The pioneers were not building a new world, they were occupying the giant ruins of a lost world. The scale of the furniture, the massive bronze statues, the sheer size of early 19th century heavy machinery, all point to occupants who were physically much larger and stronger than the typical Victorian man. The removal of the giants and their cities was orchestrated by a global authority. But how did they maintain the lie globally? By systematically destroying the source of all shared knowledge, maps. The single most powerful piece of evidence of the cover-up is the systematic, surgical erasure of an entire continent from the atlases of the world. We are about to look at the forged maps of the 19th century. When you want to control the future, you must control the past. And when you want to control the past, you must control geography. The 19th century was the age of the great cartographical deception, where the very layout of the earth was redrawn to serve the new narrative. Look at maps printed before 1850. They show vast, recognizable landmasses that simply do not exist on modern atlases. The most glaring example is Great Tartary, a massive empire that spanned the northern half of Asia. Its presence on centuries of maps, often with detailed administrative borders, proves it was a recognized geopolitical entity. But then, after the mud flood event, it simply vanishes. Its removal from maps was not a slow revision, it was a sudden, coordinated effort across multiple European cartographers. This proves a centralized directive to erase the geographical memory of the Tartarian Empire. If the empire had collapsed naturally, its name would have faded slowly, replaced by successor states. Instead, it was surgically struck from the record, leaving behind a blank, empty space soon filled with the names of disorganized tribal regions. But the map forgery goes beyond Tartaria. Pre-19th century maps often depict significantly different coastlines, different polar regions, and even different river systems. The suspicion arises, did the mud flood cataclysm physically alter the geography of the planet? Did it cause a geological shift, a polar change, or a massive injection of water that literally changed the world's shorelines? The fake maps are the new rulers' attempt to make the new, fractured geography look like it had always been that way. This level of global coordination, to eliminate a political entity and redraw the planetary geography, could only have been managed by a powerful, transnational cabal that emerged victorious from the collapse. This group, dedicated to establishing their own controlled 19th century timeline, needed to ensure that the memory of the previous world was utterly destroyed. They knew that as long as Tartaria was on the map, the questions about the buried cities and the giant people would never stop. The final piece of evidence is the most damning. It is not architectural, not biological, and not geographical. It is technological. A single, recovered image from a 19th century archive reveals the true function of the mud flood. It was a controlled deployment of a forgotten weapon. This technology didn't just move water, it moved the earth itself, burying Tartaria and creating the very hills and valleys we see today. You have seen the architectural lies and the geographical deceptions. But now, we expose the machine. The single piece of suppressed technology that proves the 19th century was a controlled event. This machine, hidden in plain sight at a World's Fair, is the smoking gun of the global collapse. We uncover the earth-moving secret and it changes everything. We have established the facts: the cities are buried, the timeline is forged, and the giants are erased. But every cover-up leaves behind a smoking gun. And the biggest secret of the mud flood is not the mud itself, it is the machine that moved it. Look closely at this archival image. It was captured at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, a place we now understand to be a massive, temporary museum of recovered Tartarian ruins. Among the genuine marvels and the cheap distractions, there was one exhibit that defies every known principle of 19th century engineering. It was often mislabeled as a hydraulic dredger or a new steam engine. But the scale, the complexity, and the bizarre coil-like components suggest something far more sinister. This machine was enormous, far larger than any standard steam shovel of the time. Its official description claimed it was powered by a conventional steam boiler, but the sheer size of the earth it was supposedly capable of moving would have required energy output impossible for a boiler of that size. Look at the primary component, a colossal, funnel-like aperture facing the ground, surrounded by intricate copper wiring and strange, non-mechanical cooling fins. This wasn't a shovel. This was a geoengineering device that we believe this device, and others like it, were recovered pieces of Tartarian technology that had been weaponized. Its true purpose was the liquefaction and directed displacement of massive amounts of earth. It didn't shovel mud, it used resonant frequencies or electromagnetic energy to turn solid ground into a slurry, which was then systematically pumped and deposited over targeted regions. This explains the uniformity of the mud layer globally. It wasn't natural erosion or a localized flood, it was the residue of a technologically directed attack. The controllers of the emerging 19th century, the survivors who claimed the ruins, put this weapon on display for a single reason: to claim ownership of the technology while simultaneously disguising its true, destructive capability. They were sending a silent message to any surviving pockets of Tartarian resistance: we have the power of your ancestors, and we can use it against you. The machine vanished shortly after the World's Fair, just like the plaster cities it was supposedly helping to build. It served its purpose: to provide a final, chilling example of the kind of force used to erase an entire civilization. The machine is proof that the mud flood was not an accident, it was a controlled, surgical strike to reset the geopolitical map. If they had a machine capable of moving the earth, what did they do with the colossal amount of earth they displaced? They created the hills, the mountains, and the geographical features we consider natural. The evidence for this earth-moving operation is hidden in the geology of the western United States, where impossible mountains rise from sudden, flat plains. When a society moves enough earth to bury entire global cities, that material has to go somewhere. The true scale of the mud flood becomes horrifying when you realize that the mud layer is not just in your basement, it is built into your landscape. We turn our attention to the vast, open territories of the western United States, particularly the Rocky Mountains and the surrounding plateaus. Geologists attribute the formation of these immense mountain ranges to millions of years of slow, grinding tectonic plate movement. But the evidence of the mud flood suggests a much more rapid, recent, and artificial origin for many of these features. Look at the composition of certain mountains and high plateaus. They often contain vast, inexplicable layers of uniform sedimentary earth that do not match the expected geological layering. This material is perfectly consistent with the fine, uniform mud residue found burying the Tartarian ruins globally. Could these mountains be the dumping grounds, the colossal waste piles created by the earth-moving machines as they cleared and buried the old Tartarian infrastructure? The geographical lie is twofold. First, they buried the cities in the existing valleys. Second, they used the displaced earth to sculpt new mountains and landscapes, effectively hiding the scale of the operation and providing a plausible, natural explanation for the current geology. This ties directly back to the forged maps we discussed. They created a new map, and then they physically created the new geography to match it. The creation of new geography served another critical function: control over resources. By engineering sudden, deep valleys and high, impassable mountains, the survivors of the collapse created natural barriers that fragmented the remaining population. This prevented widespread communication, slowed down the realization of the global scale of the cover-up, and made large-scale resistance impossible. Think about the sheer force required to instantly create or shape a mountain range. It pushes the boundaries of physics, but it is entirely consistent with the weaponized energy technology inherited from Tartaria. The 19th century wasn't witnessing geological time, it was witnessing geological warfare, executed by the cabal that sought to establish the New World Order. If they controlled the mountains, they also controlled the water. The next crucial piece of evidence is the bizarre, technologically impossible construction of the massive star forts across Europe and North America. These structures were not simply military defenses. They were integral components of Tartaria's water and energy management system, and their existence in the 19th century is proof that the rebuilding process was highly coordinated. When you examine the abandoned star forts scattered across the globe, from the coasts of the United States to the remote plains of Europe, the official narrative collapses entirely. We are told these massive, geometrically perfect, multi-pointed structures were built by 17th and 18th century militaries for defensive purposes. This explanation is a deliberate absurdity. Star forts, many of which were still in use or being actively abandoned in the 19th century, represent a level of geoengineering precision that far exceeded the supposed capabilities of their alleged builders. Their fractal, geometrically perfect design is instantly recognizable and totally consistent globally. Why would militaries in isolated regions, with limited communication, all spontaneously adopt the same single, highly complex, and unique defensive design? They didn't. They inherited them. Star forts are Tartarian infrastructure. They were not primarily built as defensive structures against primitive cannons. They were power hubs and hydroengineering facilities. Their precise geometry and often hexagonal or octagonal centers suggest a connection to harmonic frequencies and energy collection, similar to the spires on the buried buildings. Crucially, many star forts are located at strategic water junctions or elevated points, often appearing to be partially buried, much like the cities themselves. Their connection to waterways and canal systems suggests they were vital for water management, distribution, and potentially hydroenergy generation for the Tartarian grid. The fact that the 19th century authorities found these enormous, perfectly built fortifications and simply used them as military bases, without claiming to have built them themselves, is another massive admission of the cover-up. They were simply repurposing the available, inherited structures for their immediate needs. They labeled them forts to provide a plausible, military context, thus hiding their true nature as Tartarian power stations. The star forts are physical proof that the 19th century began with a functional, global system already in place. The controllers of the mud flood simply took over the control points of the previous civilization. And if they could reuse the infrastructure, they could also reuse the population. The cities were ready-made. The technology was recovered. But where did the population of the 19th century suddenly come from? The historical record is eerily silent on the population explosion needed to fill these gigantic, empty cities. We are about to investigate the most chilling conspiracy of all. Was the population of the 19th century mass cultivated and settled into a ready-made world? The greatest logistical challenge facing the survivors of the mud flood was not the buildings, but the people. A massive, global civilization was decimated. Yet, within a few decades, by the late 19th century, the newly emerging nation seemed to have an organized population base capable of operating the recovered infrastructure. Where did they all come from? Look at the photographs of the great cities in the early to mid-1800s, the empty city phenomenon we mentioned. The streets are desolate. The lack of people cannot be explained by long exposure times alone. It reflects the terrifying reality: there were simply not enough people left to properly populate and operate the colossal Tartarian infrastructure. The survivors were few, scattered, and deeply traumatized. This leads to the most chilling theory in the Epoch Reset archive: the mass cultivation of the 19th century population. This theory suggests that the surviving elite, realizing they needed a workforce to maintain the inherited cities and machinery, initiated a highly organized, systematic process to rapidly increase the human population. This may sound like science fiction, but examine the historical timing. The 19th century saw the sudden, inexplicable rise of foundling hospitals, orphan trains, and massive, government-sponsored resettlement programs across Europe and the United States. These institutions operated with incredible secrecy and received vast amounts of government funding. Were these just charitable organizations? Or were they processing centers for a quickly cultivated, new population, designed to be resettled into the ready-made cities? Furthermore, the sudden, mass standardization of education and the introduction of mandatory schooling coincide perfectly with this period. The new population needed to be quickly indoctrinated into the false history, the narrative that they were the glorious pioneers, not the inheritors of ruins. The school system became the primary tool for historical reprogramming, cementing the lie of the slow, linear progress of the 19th century. The mud flood wasn't just a reset of the land, it was a human reset. The old giants were buried, and a new, smaller, more compliant population was rapidly cultivated and strategically deployed to claim the vacated cities. This ensured that the new rulers would have a workforce that owed their very existence and knowledge to the new authority. The process of reprogramming the population required more than just schools, it required psychological warfare. The new rulers had to eliminate the memory of the collapse entirely, and they used an insidious tool hidden within the art and literature of the 19th century. We are about to decode the secret messages hidden in the literature of Edgar Allan Poe and Jules Verne that detail the exact nature of the global collapse. The controllers of the 19th century understood that physical evidence can be buried, but the psychological trauma of a global collapse is harder to erase. To truly finalize the reset, they needed to manage the collective memory of the survivors. Their weapon was literature and art. We must look at the dark, pervasive themes in the literature of the mid-19th century: the rise of Gothic horror, existential dread, and tales of underground chambers and vast, desolate ruins. Writers like Edgar Allan Poe, whose stories are filled with premature burial, strange floods, and deep psychological trauma, were not simply reflecting the human condition. We believe they were part of a coordinated effort to process and contain the trauma of the mud flood collapse. Poe's stories, such as the premature burial and the fall of the House of Usher, speak of being entombed and the sudden, catastrophic destruction of massive, ancient structures. These literary works acted as a psychological release valve for the collective subconscious of the survivors, allowing them to engage with the reality of the disaster, being buried alive in the ruins, but within a fictional, contained, and escapist framework. This prevented the realization that their shared, horrific reality was a historical fact, not a nightmare. The psychological operation was simple: if you see the trauma reflected in art, you believe the trauma is merely an invention of a troubled artist, not a shared reality. Furthermore, the rise of the adventure and exploration genre in the late 19th century, epitomized by Jules Verne, served a similar purpose. Verne's books, which feature incredible feats of engineering and the discovery of lost worlds, were designed to reinstill a sense of wonder and technological optimism, a direct antidote to the trauma of finding out that the former civilization was technologically superior. The message was, look forward, not backward. We are the great discoverers now. The 19th century was not just a historical lie, it was a psychological operation of unprecedented scale, designed to make the resettled population forget the giants, forget the free energy, and forget the machine that buried their world. But there is one final, simple truth they could not hide. It's a fact that permeates every single surviving photograph from the time that we have exposed the lie of the construction, the lie of the giants, and the lie of the machine. But the simplest piece of photographic evidence reveals the deepest betrayal. It's in the streets, in the buildings, and in the faces of the few people who are actually present in the photographs. We are talking about the deliberate photographic distortion that proves the entire 19th century photographic record is a massive, controlled fake. You have seen the buried cities, the suppressed technology, and the cultivated population. But the greatest weapon used by the 19th century controllers was the one you trust the most, the camera. We are now going to expose the deliberate photographic manipulation that proves the entire 19th century photographic record is a massive, controlled fake. We are reaching the culmination of this investigation. If you are questioning everything they ever taught you, make sure you subscribe to the Epoch Reset channel and hit the like button right now, because we are about to reveal the simple trick they used to fake the presence of massive armies and bustling crowds in the 19th century, and you will learn why this deception is still used on you today. Look at the overwhelming lack of people in early 19th century city photographs, the so-called empty city phenomenon. The official explanation is always the same: long exposure times. They claim that people moving too fast simply didn't register on the slow film. This is technically true, but deliberately misleading. If the exposures were genuinely that long, why do we consistently see 1. Perfectly still horses standing motionlessly for minutes? 2. Perfectly sharp carriages sitting without blur? 3. Impossibly sharp details in clothing and architectural features that would require absolute stillness. The truth is that the exposure times were often manageable. The cities were genuinely empty. The handful of people who do appear in these photos, a lone street sweeper, a person on a balcony, are not accidental passers-by. They are staged actors, placed there deliberately by the photographers to give the impression of some life, to prevent the viewer from realizing the terrifying truth: the cities were vacated ruins, recently settled by a small, traumatized population. The photographic deception goes deeper. Examine images claiming to show massive historical events, such as military parades, huge crowd gatherings, or bustling World's Fair interiors. Upon forensic inspection, these images often show evidence of compositing and retouching. Identical figures are copied and pasted multiple times, crowds look suspiciously uniform, and the lighting on individual subjects often fails to match the background. This was the nascent art of photographic propaganda. The 19th century controllers were pioneering the manipulation of visual truth. They couldn't populate the streets overnight, so they populated the photographs. They needed the world to believe that their new empire was bustling, prosperous, and built by a massive, thriving population, not inherited by a handful of survivors. The camera, originally invented to capture reality, became the ultimate tool for fabricating it. The photographic lie was essential for political control, but what about the historical artifacts themselves? We have covered the buildings and the maps. Now, we must turn to the bizarre objects they tried to hide. We are about to decode the true meaning of the strange, miniature weapons and colossal locks found across 19th century digs. Were they children's toys, or proof of a dimensional shift? The physical remnants of the collapse provide the strangest riddles. When excavating Tartarian ruins in the 19th century, workers consistently found two types of artifacts that were immediately dismissed as oddities and stored away in dusty museum basements: massive, impossibly complex locking mechanisms and perfectly scaled miniature replicas of heavy machinery and weapons. The megalocks are the first clue. These brass or iron locking mechanisms are often beautifully crafted, featuring intricate spring and gear systems, yet they are of a colossal size, too large for any door, vault, or gate known in the 19th century. Why would Tartaria, a civilization of giants, need locks that weigh hundreds of pounds and require 2 men to operate? The official answer: ceremonial. But we believe these were security components for gates and doors designed for beings vastly larger than the giants themselves, or perhaps complex parts of a hidden underground infrastructure. Their sheer mechanical complexity screams of a technology far beyond the locksmiths of the Victorian era. The second riddle is the miniature machinery. Perfectly detailed, operational, or near operational, replicas of cannons, steam engines, and complicated mechanical devices, all reduced to a scale of 1/10 or 1/20. Historians dismiss them as simple toys or prototypes. But look at the precision. The internal components are too accurate, the materials too fine, to be mere playthings. We propose a radical theory. These miniatures were Tartarian operational models. Tartaria was a global empire utilizing free energy and anti-gravity technology. These miniatures were likely used for rapid prototyping or remote control of the massive, hidden infrastructure. They represent the practical application of the forgotten science. Their existence confirms that the 19th century did not invent this technology, it simply found miniature instructions left behind. The combination of the megalox and the miniatures presents a terrifying duality, a civilization built on a massive, complex scale, megalox, that utilized advanced, precise control systems, miniatures. The controllers of the 19th century, unable to understand the scale or the purpose of these objects, simply filed them away as curiosities, accidentally preserving undeniable evidence of a technological society that preceded their own. The truth is that the destruction of Tartaria was not just a historical event, it was a cosmic one. The next piece of evidence, the strange, impossible weather patterns recorded in the 19th century, suggests the mud flood was directly linked to a terrifying celestial anomaly that the controllers desperately tried to cover up with mundane meteorological reports. The mud flood required an immense energy source, and the earth-moving machines were just the terrestrial component. We must look upwards, because the most damning evidence of the global catastrophe is written in the 19th century sky. The 19th century was rife with bizarre, unexplainable atmospheric events that defied normal meteorological records. We find widespread accounts of the year without a summer, or sudden, intense cold snaps across multiple continents. The appearance of strange, glowing clouds or unexplained atmospheric haze. Massive, sudden, and localized downpours of water that went far beyond typical rainstorms. The official explanation often points to volcanic eruptions, like Tambora, but the scale and duration of the anomalies suggest something far larger. We believe the mud flood was triggered, or at least exacerbated, by a celestial anomaly, a near pass of a comet or asteroid that violently destabilized the Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere. This cosmic event would have had two catastrophic effects. 1. Electromagnetic discharge, causing the widespread fires and destructive energy spikes often cited in alternative theories of the collapse. 2. Atmospheric liquefaction. The massive atmospheric disturbance could have triggered the geoengineering weapons, the mud flood machines, or caused a phenomenon that turned vast amounts of moisture or even part of the upper crust into the slurry that buried the cities. The 19th century media establishment spent an inordinate amount of time normalizing these catastrophic weather events, labeling them unusual, or localized deviations. This was crucial. By divorcing the bizarre weather patterns from the global architectural anomalies, they ensured the population never linked the buried buildings to the strange skies. The celestial chaos was the ultimate weapon that destroyed Tartaria, and the survivors of the 19th century immediately went to work to ensure no future generation would ever look up and realize that the history of the Earth is marked by sudden, violent resets from space. The controllers created a false history, but they couldn't entirely silence the voices of the giants. Before the final purge, some survivors of the Tartarian collapse left behind secret messages in the only way they knew how, embedded in the design of the new world. We are about to decode the strange, repetitive symbols hidden on 19th century public monuments. When a civilization is facing annihilation, it leaves behind a message. The 19th century controllers were ruthless in burning texts and faking photographs, but they made one colossal mistake. They left the secret messages of Tartaria encoded in the new architecture itself. We are talking about the ubiquitous, repetitive symbols and glyphs found carved into /BM, a 19th century public buildings, monuments, and official seals. Symbols like the specific use of the T-square and compass, the phoenix rising from the ashes, and the stylized flaming sunburst. These symbols are universally dismissed as Masonic or simple decorative elements. This is the final layer of protection for the truth. In reality, These were the emergency communication network of the Tartarian survivors. These symbols were placed on the recovered buildings by surviving Tartarian masons and engineers who were forced to work for the new regime. They were communicating two core pieces of information. 1. The system is down. Symbols showing destruction or fire, the phoenix, were a signal to other survivors that the civilization had collapsed. 2. The knowledge remains. Symbols showing precise geometry, the T-square/compass, were a promise that the knowledge of free energy and advanced engineering had been preserved. Perhaps in secret societies, the new 19th century elites were aware of some of these societies, and rather than eliminating them entirely, they decided to co-opt and corrupt them. They took the Tartarian symbols, gave them a new, innocuous meaning, e.g., fraternity or charity, and allowed them to proliferate. This ensured that the real message was drowned out by the noise of the official, false interpretation. This symbolic language is a direct line to the heart of the conspiracy. It proves that the 19th century elite were not the primary authors of the New World, they were the editors and censors of the old. The symbols are the ghost of Tartaria, confirming that the very stones of our cities are still trying to tell us the truth about the global reset, that we have exposed the architectural, geographical, and technological lies. Now, we are at the ultimate question. The final piece of evidence must pull all these threads together. The greatest secret of the entire cover-up is who was behind the mud flood. We must identify the single, organized entity that controlled the machine, faked the maps, and engineered the New World Order. We reveal the identity of the controller in the final block, and it will change how you view power forever. We have journeyed through the mud flood, excavated the ruins of Tartaria, and exposed the suppression of free energy and the giant people. We have seen the evidence, the buried buildings, the faked maps, the massive earth-moving machine. The 19th century was not an age of creation, but an era of managed decay and historical fabrication. The final, terrifying truth must now be faced. Who was the single entity with the resources, the motivation, and the transnational reach to coordinate the mud flood, execute the historical purge, and establish the New World Order based on resource scarcity? The controller was not a single country. It was not a single political party. It was the emerging transnational financial and industrial oligarchy, the banking dynasties, the rail barons, and the oil magnates whose power was directly threatened by Tartaria's free energy and decentralized global structure. They needed a global collapse to eliminate the competition, Tartaria, and seize the necessary infrastructure to implement their plan, a world where energy, food, and knowledge were controlled and metered for maximum profit. The mud flood was the tool. The 19th century was the cover-up. And the result is the controlled, metered world you live in today. But their control is fragile. Every time you question the depth of a basement, every time you see a gargantuan doorframe, every time you recognize a star fort, you are chipping away at their fabricated timeline. The Epoch Reset is the final battle for historical truth. We have given you the decoder ring. We have given you the smoking gun. Now it is your turn to act. If this video has opened your eyes, and if you believe that the truth about the /BM 19-th century must be known, then subscribe to Epoch Reset, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment below right now. Tell us, which piece of evidence, the mud flood, the giant skeletons, or the earth-moving machine, is the most terrifying proof that our entire history is a lie? And what do you think they are hiding in the deepest buried levels of the cities?